Okay. Okay, so good evening. And we just concluded the holiday of Shavuot last evening. And, today's actually called Yisroel Chag, the day after Shavuot, which we have the spillover of all the offerings. And I wanted to briefly offer a line of thinking which came to my attention over Shavuot, and which I think is very, very worthwhile thinking about as we carry Shavuot forward. First of all, as there are three festivals in the Torah. The three festivals are Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And it's clear that Shavuot is by far the least well-known of the festivals. And if you look in the Torah itself, which is in Leviticus chapter 23, right around page 685 in the Art Scroll Chumash, you can easily understand why. It's given the shortest shrift. And strangely, it's a one-day holiday, where the other festivals, Sukkot is a 7-day festival with an 8th day tacked on, Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly. Pesach is a 7-day holiday, and Shavuot stands out as a 1-day holiday. And as we know by tradition, although this is not written into the Torah, that it's the day that the Torah was presented on Mount Sinai. And we say, when we refer to Shavuot in the prayers, we say, Chag HaShavuot Hazeh, this holiday of Shavuot, Zman Matan Toratenu, the day our Torah was given to us. So what I want to begin with thinking about is the following idea. Let's look at the narrative first for a moment in the Torah itself. It's page 685 in the Art Scroll Chumash. And basically, if we go back one page on chapter 23, you'll see it's an introduction. God says, I'm going to teach the festivals of the Jewish people. First comes Pesach, and it's explicit as to when it takes place. It's a time to eat matzah. Then it talks about the counting of the Omer, the 7 weeks of 7 days. And on the 50th day, as you turn over to page 684, 85, it refers to the fact that there's a holiday, and it tells you how you commemorate that holiday. That once you've counted the 7 days and 7 weeks, and you've counted the Omer, then you wave the 2 breads, which we referred to in last week's class, and you bring various offerings, and the Kohen waves the offerings in front of the Mizbeach, and we're turning the page over to page 686, 687. There shall be a holy convocation for yourselves. You shall do no laborious work. It is an eternal decree in your dwelling places for your generations. And then right before the Torah goes on to talk about Rosh Hashanah, which is not a festival day, it's a day of no work, but it's a day which is commemorative of the creation of the world, has its own category. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are not festivals. We have 3 festivals. And then it goes on and talks about Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. But strangely, right here in chapter 23, it sticks in laws of when you reap your harvest of your land, you shall not remove completely the corners of your field as you reap, and you shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest. For the poor and the proselyte shall you leave them. I am Hashem your God. And then it goes on to say, speak to the children of Israel in the 7th month and the 1st of the month, there shall be a rest day for you, not referred to as a festival, and that's Rosh Hashanah. So I just first want to pose the question, the fact that the leaving the corners of the field, the leket and shikha, and these special things that have to do with harvest, which we know very well from the book of Ruth, which is read on Shavuot, is the setting for thinking about Shavuot. Why is it mentioned here? And I want to address that idea in a very unusual way, because I want to explain that there's one of the names given to the holiday of Shavuot, and it has several names, as do other festivals as well, is called Atzeret. And you'll find that it's a day of assembly. And the Ramban questions, where did this name Atzeret come from? because Atzeret is used in the Torah to refer to the 8th day of Sukkot, which is its own holiday, which is a bookend to a period of time. So why would we call Shavuot also a holiday of Atzeret? And various explanations are given. But the one which is most cogent to me is the following thought, that really Shavuot, being a one-day holiday, has its own Chol HaMoed, has its own in-between days. And those in-between days are in fact the days when we count the Omer, from the second day of Pesach all the way through the 7 weeks of counting. We have a tradition, and it's an unusual tradition, I just want to make sense of it, that the entire 7-week period is like the Chol HaMoed of Shavuot. And hence Shavuot is referred to as Atzeret. It ends a period of time because you have Pesach celebrating the fact that we went out of Egypt. You have the in-between days of counting the Omer, which are all based on harvesting taking place. And then you come to the end of that period, and it's called Atzeret, another name for Shavuot, when we've counted 49 days, and this 50th day. And that connects to the fact that in the chapter 23 that we just read, the Torah links the corners of the field and the gleanings that are left for the poor directly to the holiday of Shavuot. And why would that be? So to hear the question, I'm saying, if Shavuot was purely the day we stood on Har Sinai and Mount Sinai and we received the Torah, so then it wouldn't be linked back to the in-between days. How would you connect the days of counting the Omer to the festival of Shavuot? And I think the answer can be found in our attitude towards the Torah itself. And that's what I wanted to reflect on as an afterthought to Shavuot. We call Shavuot, we say it's Zman Matan Toratenu, the day in which we were given our Torah. We don't call it Zman Matan HaTorah. We don't say it's the day the Torah was given at Sinai. We rather refer to it as the day when we received our Torah. And I want to just emphasize that idea, because the attitude that we have toward Torah as being a shared legacy changes the way we observe Shavuot. It changes the commandment to learn Torah, and it should have a big impact on the way we conduct our affairs at all times. We say in the end of Devarim, chapter 33, we have the famous sentence, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, that Moshe commanded us to fulfill the Torah. Morasha, it is a legacy, it's an inheritance for the Kehilat Yaakov, for the assembly of Jacob. And a very innovative thought that I heard Rabbi Foreman make in the middle of a huge class. And I think it's clever, it's insightful, and it's something to think about. He says, a man dies, we'll call him Ralph, and his 5 children inherit his property. And let's assume that it's real estate, we'll keep it simply. So however they divide it up, this one takes this building, they go through probate, it's all fairly distributed. So now what you have on earth is 5 individuals linked by the fact that they were all the children of Ralph, and they all have their property that they manage and take the income from and live off of. So from their perspective, they would say, if you ask them, how is your building doing on downtown? So they might say, oh, my building is doing great. How's your brother's building doing downtown? Oh, my brother, he's doing well with his building also. How's your other brother doing, etc. But what Rabbi Foreman said in a way that just is very insightful is he says, if you think of the Father in heaven and you were sitting down and having a coffee with him, what would you say to him? You would say to him, Ralph, how are your buildings doing? And Ralph would say, oh, my buildings, they're doing well. This son has this building, he's doing well with it. This son has that building, this son has that building. But from the perspective of the father who created the legacy, the truth is that there's still one group of properties divided out and parceled out to his 5 heirs. So in a way that each one comes to feel as though I own that parcel. And Rabbi Foreman says in a very interesting way, he says, the idea of Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kihilat Yaakov, that it's a legacy, it's an inheritance for us, the community of Jacob, means that forever my Torah and your Torah and the Torah, so to speak, that's owned and acquired and in the possession of each and every Jewish person. And we might think of it from our perspective as though I studied, I learned, this is my understanding of the Torah, and you have your understanding of the Torah. But from the proper perspective of Torah, recognizing the fact that it all originated at Sinai, and it was bequeathed to us as a nation by God, so that we share it. And that goes back to explain why we say Zman Matan Toratenu, the time when our Torah was given. The holiday of Shavuot is meant also to remind us that we, the corpus of the Jewish people who stood together at Sinai and received this gift and legacy and inheritance from God, and we've each, in our own way, run in our own direction, just like heirs of a legacy do. And we each have our own slice of the pie, and we each take pride in it, and we're happy with it. But it's important for us to recognize in a substantial way how united we are in this possession of the Torah and how much it links us together. And hence we talk about Zman Matan Toratenu, that it's not that, oh, this is the day on which I received my home, and the day you received your home, and the day you received your home. No, it's the day when the owner of all of our homes, so to speak, all of our legacy of Torah, bequeathed it to us. And over the years and over the generations, from our perspective, it becomes parceled out. But from God's perspective, it remains the unified legacy that was given to the entire Jewish people. How does this make a difference? This makes a difference because we say in the blessings of the Shema, lilmod u'lilamed, to study and to teach. Well, not all of us are teachers, but we mentioned a medrash a few weeks ago, which indicated that any person who learns Torah and sees that Torah as being their own private possession and doesn't feel a need to share it and to teach it. And what I would add specifically, as we know the Torah commands us to teach our children diligently, who would have something precious that they wouldn't want to pass on to their children and refrain from them? And hence we get the imperative to be that each of us should be teachers, conveyors of our legacy, and most especially to our own children. We have to see to it that this Yerusha, this inheritance, continues. And that's what we talk about in terms of ourselves. When we make the blessings of the Torah, we say, V'tein chelkeinu b'toratecha. We ask God, give me my portion. Give each of us our portion. And we know that the most dastardly crime is when one inheritor cheats another inheritor out of their fair share. All the novels, the stories, the books, the dramas. In other words, because if it's bequeathed to you and to me, and it's meant to be portioned out, then that means you deserve your portion, and I deserve my portion. Of course, both of our portions are linked because they come from the same source. But when we, and with this obligation to share our knowledge with one another, we can take our portion and add it to everyone else's. And therefore we maintain this unity and connection. The wild idea that Rabbi Foreman teaches, and I haven't seen the sources to it yet, but he says that the maintenance of the Jubilee year, Shemitah year, every 50 years, when all the ancestral pieces of property go back to their original owners, because unto God does the world belong, that's what the Torah says, is an echo of the experience at Sinai. And with this idea, we can understand the connection. We understand the connection of Shemitah, and most especially Yovel, back to Mount Sinai, which is a question that's dealt with by the rabbis. Because what happens on the Jubilee year? All of a sudden, my property, I have to look up the records and say, oh, this property originally belonged to this family from the tribe of Dan. So it's the 50th Jubilee year. It goes back to that family. It reinforces this notion that all that we have, and most especially the Torah, which is our precious guidance for life, is an inheritance. We share for our mutual benefit. And as much as we strive to have a piece of the pie that we can acquire to uplift ourselves and benefit ourselves, we ultimately see that as part of the shared legacy and a shared inheritance. As we say, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, that Moshe presented us with the Torah we were commanded to fulfill. Morasha, he did it as an inheritance. And I just wanted to conclude with one further application of this. There's a beautiful medrash, and it goes on a sentence in Psalms that says, God understands our nature. And the medrash Avot the Rebbe Nosson gives the following allegory. It says, once upon a time, there was a king, and the king divided up his fields amongst the servants. And he told each servant, I'm giving you a portion of the field. It's up to you to la'avda l'shamra, quoting the words here that we use for Adam and Eve. It's up for you to work the fields and to guard over them, and to bring a tribute to me, the king, of 30 measures each year as the king's portion of your labor. And the rest is all up to you. So these people begin working and toiling and developing their fields and planting. And lo and behold, after a period of time passes, they go into a panic. And they look at each other and they say, we haven't even yielded enough crop to cover the portion that the king expects from us, let alone to have an abundance that we can have our portion and the king can have his portion. So what are we to do? So they're not knowing what to do, they all approach the king. And they say to the king, King, you gave me a field. Each of them says, you gave me a field. I've worked with diligence and effort. I've striven to meet the goals you have set in terms of production, but I've fallen short. I don't know what to do. And that's where the Medrash refers back to the sentence that God understands the nature of us, mankind. And the king responds and says, because I see that you've exerted yourself and you worked the fields and you did so in a cooperative way, and you did so with all good intention, everything you produced, you can keep for yourself. And I'm not going to hold you to the levy of tithe or portion that you were meant to give to the king. And I think this allegory, this sense that we are in this together, this is our Torah. So if I have a thought of Torah, I'll enjoy sharing it with you. And if you have a thought of Torah, you'll enjoy sharing it with me, and there'll be more Torah in the world, because this is what we've inherited together. Just like, to go back to what Rabbi Foreman said, the 5 brothers, each of whom hopefully become greater and greater in wealth and standing, building upon the legacy that they were presented with. And I just thought these were nice closing thoughts in terms of understanding the real message of Shavuot. And of course, it ties into the book of Ruth, because what's the whole story of Ruth? It's the time of the harvest. And Ruth and Naomi come back and they have nothing. They're bereft. They've, so to speak, lost their portion amongst the Jewish people. Ruth is a newcomer, but Naomi had lost her ample portion. And it takes a great person who embodies Torah like a Boaz to fulfill these mitzvot of sharing the corners of the field and leaving the gleanings for the poor and seeing to it that, yes, this is my field and I work it and I put my effort and my energy into producing as much as I can. But the benefit is not only for me, because the same way God gave us a Torah for all of us to share, the same way God gave us a land of Israel for all of us to share, God expects us to live in a way and builds in mitzvot into the Torah, which reinforce these ideas. And in that sense, the Shemitah year, when I literally relinquish ownership of my own property and I give it back to the ancestral owner, is such a fulfillment of what the goal of Shavuot and Matan Torah was. God relinquishes ownership of the Torah, as we discussed a week ago, and he gives it to us to enrich our lives and to elevate ourselves. We have to remain mindful that it's ours, not mine. We have to show concern for one another. We have to be mindful of the people who are left out or falling by the wayside, or who are not able to on their own find their own share of God's legacy of Torah, and guide that person, help that person, bring that person in. See to it that we drop gleanings of our knowledge and wisdom in a way that they can pick it up and they can utilize it. Make sure that there's room in our fields for them to join us in the harvest, and thereby honor the fact that on the day of Shavuot, 3,300 years ago, God gave us a legacy to share throughout history. And that's the way we treat our Torah now and forever. That was the afterthought I wanted to add. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Rabbi, do you think there's an element of talking about, our Torah as having some responsibility and therefore accountability?
To others, you mean, for one another?
To the words of the Torah.
Ask your question again. I'm sorry.
So if we say it's ours, it means, when I say ours, it means me, right? I'm included. And therefore there's some element of responsibility and maybe accountability to the Torah itself and its writings.
Right.
And maybe together it joins us, but it's an individual.
So in a way that, what in a certain sense, the previous holiday of Passover, where God redeemed us from slavery and gave us our freedom and gave us our opportunity to find our own way in the world, that's very much linked to the responsibility that God places upon us to live our lives within the context or confines or parameters that the Torah sets for us. And that was the purpose for which we were redeemed, So I think that comes more from Passover than it does from Shavuot, but that is part and parcel of the picture, no question about it. Okay, thank you very much. I want to wish everybody a good evening, and please God, we'll meet again next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.